My truck's engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the clearing besides the wind hissing through the lodgepole pines. The Payette National Forest Ranger Station was a low-slung, dark wood building that looked like it had grown there. A stubborn fungus clinging to the side of the mountain. It was my first day, and the air already smelled of dust, pine sap, and a deeper, colder scent I couldn't name. I was here for the quiet and for the debt I'd left in Boise. A government paycheck, even a small one, in a place where no one knew my name seemed like a good start. The key was under a specific lichen-crusted rock 20 paces east of the front door, just as the email from my supervisor, Bill, had stated. He wouldn't be here to greet me. His shift ended at 3 in the afternoon. Mine began. The handoff was always procedural, never personal. The key was cold and heavy in my hand. The front door opened into a single, large room that served as the nerve center. It was dominated by a large topographic map on one wall, dotted with colored pins. A bank of radio equipment, older than I was, hummed on a central desk. The air was still and carried the faint metallic tang of old coffee and ozone. On the desk, next to the main radio set, was a sealed manila envelope with my name typed on it. Leo. Inside was a key to the supply locker, a map of the immediate area with certain trails, highlighted in red, and a single sheet of paper titled Dispatch Protocol Station Orientation. At the bottom, in neat, handwritten block letters, was a postscript. Read this first, then read the binder. Do not touch the radio until you have read both. Bill. The binder was thick, its blue cover faded. I opened it. The first page was a simple, numbered list. 1. Your shift is from 3 p.m. to 7 a.m. You are alone. Do not expect visitors. If you see someone approaching the station, they are not a visitor. 2. At 3:15 p.m., perform a full inventory of the supply locker. The list is on the locker door. Every item must be accounted for. Note any discrepancies in the logbook. 3. The radio is your primary tool. Monitor channel 9 at all times. Channel 6 is for emergency broadcasts only. You will hear things on channel 6. Do not respond unless you hear the phrase, check base, weather clear. Any other transmission on channel 6 is not for you. 4. The front door is to be locked at 5 p.m. precisely. It is not to be unlocked for any reason until 6:47 a.m. 5. The generator shed is off limits after dusk. If the power fails, use the emergency lanterns under the desk. Do not attempt to repair the generator until sunrise. 6. A perimeter check must be conducted at 7 p.m., 11 p.m., and 3 a.m. exactly. The check consists of walking to each of the 4 corners of the building, visually confirming the marker post is upright, and returning to the front door. The entire check should take no more than 3 minutes. If it takes longer, do not re-enter the station. Proceed to the outbuilding and follow the instructions inside. 7. Do not look out the south-facing window between the hours of 1 a.m. and 1:15 a.m. 8. If you hear footsteps on the roof, ignore them. They are not footsteps. 9. If the phone rings, let it. It is not the phone. 10. You may hear knocking. A single knock is to be ignored. A double knock requires you to respond with a single knock of your own on the interior wall. A triple knock means you are to remain silent and hold your breath until you hear the all-clear signal on channel 9. 2 clicks, followed by a 10-second pause, then 1 click. 11. The previous dispatcher S log is on the desk. Read it. You are not the first. I read the list twice. The debt in Boise felt very far away, replaced by a low, cold curiosity. It was an elaborate hazing ritual, I decided. A test for the new guy. I'd play along, for now. The supply locker was a walk-in closet reinforced with steel mesh. The inventory list was meticulous. 12 road flares, 6 gallons of distilled water, 4 emergency blankets, a first aid kit, a fire axe, 24 MREs, and so on. I counted everything. It all matched. I signed the logbook. The entry from Bill S. shift yesterday was identical, signed with a sharp, precise hand. I sat at the radio desk. The equipment was a mix of old and new. The primary console for Channel 9 had a warm green glow. I put on the headset. Static, then the faint, broken voice of a ranger on patrol miles away, reporting a downed tree across a service road. Normal, mundane. This was a job. I could do this. At 5:00, the light outside was beginning to soften. I walked to the heavy wooden door, turned the deadbolt, and slid the thick iron bar across it. The sound was final. The station was sealed. I was sealed inside. The first anomaly happened at 7:02 p.m., just after I'd completed my first perimeter check. The check had been unnervingly quiet, the only sound the crunch of my boots on gravel. Each marker post a simple painted stake was upright. It had taken me 2 minutes and 50 seconds. As I stepped back inside, relocking the door, the radio on Channel 6 crackled to life. Channel 6 was supposed to be silent. A voice, distorted by static and distance, came through. It was a child-esque voice. "Hello, is anyone there? I'm lost." My hand twitched toward the microphone. It was instinct. A lost kid, out here in the growing dark. Then I remembered Rule 3. Do not respond unless you hear the phrase, "check base, weather clear." I forced my hand back to the desk, gripping the edge until my knuckles were white. The voice came again, a little whimper. "Please, I'm scared." It was a recording, I told myself. A test of the system. A cruel one. I looked at the clock. The transmission lasted for 17 seconds. Then silence. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I wrote in the log, 7:02 p.m. Channel 6 active. Juvenile voice, reported being lost. No trigger. Phrase. No response given. The night deepened. I made coffee, its bitterness a welcome anchor. At 8:10, there was a single, solid thump on the roof, directly overhead. I froze, my cup halfway to my lips. Rule 8, they are not footsteps. It was probably a pine cone, I reasoned. A branch falling. The building settling. But it had been too sharp, too localized. I didn't write it down. The next few hours passed with a tense regularity. Radio checks on Channel 9, the logbook entries, the slow sip of coffee. At 11, I did my second perimeter check. The night was clear and cold, the sky a vast spill of stars. The marker posts were all upright. As I turned at the northwest corner, I saw a flicker of movement in the tree line, about 50 yards out. A shape, dark and low to the ground. A bear, maybe, or a shadow. It was gone before I could focus. I completed the check in 2 minutes and 55 seconds. I was getting faster. The temptation came at 12:45. The phone rang. The sound was a physical shock, a harsh, mechanical jangle that cut through the radio's steady hum. Rule 9, it is not the phone. I stared at the old black rotary phone on the corner of the desk. It rang again, insistent. Who would be calling? Bill? Ranger HQ? It had to be a test, a wrong number. It rang a third time. My mind conjured images. A hiker in trouble, a ranger with a broken radio, someone who needed help. What if the rules were wrong? On the fourth ring, my training overrode my fear. I stood up, walked to the phone and placed my hand on the receiver. It was vibrating with each ring. I could answer it. I could say, "Payette Dispatch, state your emergency." It would be so easy. The fifth ring never came. It stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. I stood there, my hand hovering, for a full minute. Then I returned to my seat. My hand was shaking. I wrote in the log, 12:45 a.m. Phone rang four times, no answer. At 1 minute to 1, I found myself staring at the south-facing window. It was a small square pane of glass, offering a view of a dense thicket of young pines. Rule 7. Do not look out the south-facing window between the hours of 1 a.m. and 1:15 a.m. Why? What was so special about that window, that specific quarter hour? The digital clock on the radio console flipped to 1, Zabath Trukik. I kept my eyes fixed on the logbook. I could feel the window in my peripheral vision, a dark, inviting rectangle. What was out there? Was something going to appear? Was it a safety thing, like not looking at a welding arc? The silence in the room felt pressurized, waiting. I heard a faint scraping sound from the direction of the window, like a branch being dragged slowly across the outer wall. I didn't look. I focused on my breathing, on the grain of the wood in the desk. I counted the seconds in my head, 1 minute, 2. The scraping stopped, then started again, this time higher up, near the top of the pane. At 1:15, the sensation of pressure vanished. The room felt normal again. I risked a glance. The window showed only blackness, the reflection of the room's dim lights. I had obeyed. Nothing had happened. I felt a small, ridiculous surge of pride. I was learning the rhythm of this place. The rest of the night was a cycle of small alarms and strict adherence. A double knock at the door at 2:30 a.m. sent me tapping once on the wall. A series of 3 knocks at 4 a.m. had me holding my breath until the 2-click, 1-click signal came over channel 9. Exactly 90 seconds later. I was tired, the kind of deep fatigue that makes the world feel thin and unreal. My final perimeter check at 3 a.m. was the hardest. The air had grown colder, and a thin mist had settled in the clearing. My flashlight beam cut a weak swath through the gloom. The marker posts were all there. At the southeast corner, the one closest to the tree line, I saw that the post was slightly tilted, not fallen, just a few degrees off vertical. It could have been the frost heaving the ground. It could have been an animal. Rule 6 was clear. Visually confirm the marker post is upright. This one wasn't, not quite. The rule was also clear about what happened if the check took longer than 3 minutes. Do not re-enter the station. Proceed to the outbuilding. I looked at the small, shed-like structure 20 yards away. It was pitch black inside. I didn't know what instructions were in there. I didn't want to know. I looked at my watch. I had been out for 1 minute and 20 seconds. I had time. I took 2 quick steps, knelt by the post, and pushed it firmly back into the soft earth. It was upright. I turned and almost ran back to the front door, my breath pluming in the air. I was inside, the door barred, in 2 minutes and 58 seconds. I had cut it too close. I didn't sleep for the rest of the shift. I watched the clock, counting down the minutes until dawn. At 6:47 a.m., I unlocked the front door. The morning light was gray and weak, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. At 7:05 a.m., Bill S. truck pulled into the clearing. He was a man in his late 50s, with a weathered face and calm, tired eyes. He nodded to me as he entered, hanging his coat on a peg. Quiet night? I thought of the voice on Channel 6, the phone, the knocks, the tilted post. "Quiet enough," I said. He grunted, pouring himself coffee. He picked up the logbook, his eyes scanning my entries. He stopped at the note about the phone. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You didn't answer it." "It's Rule 9, I said. He gave a slow, single nod. "Good." He closed the logbook. "Get some sleep. Your shift starts again at 3. As I walked to my truck, the sun finally broke over the ridge, painting the clearing in gold. The fear of the night felt distant, a bad dream. I had followed the rules. I had survived. But as I drove away, the memory of that tilted post stayed with me. I had fixed it. I had broken the procedure, but I had fixed the problem. A part of me, the part that was still a rational man from Boise, whispered that I had done the right thing. The other part, the part that was now a dispatcher in the Payette, wondered what price that small deviation would exact. The next 2 weeks settled into a grim routine. The days were for fitful sleep in my rented cabin, and the nights were for the strict, silent liturgy of the station. I learned the rhythms. The voice on Channel 6 came every third night, always a child, sometimes crying, sometimes calling for a dog named Buster. The single knocks on the roof were a nightly occurrence, sometimes followed by a slow, dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled across the shingles. I stopped flinching. I logged it all. I met the other dispatcher, a woman named Sarah, who worked the day shift on my days off. She was in her 40s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and fingers stained with ink. We overlapped for 15 minutes during shift change. Our conversations were brief and entirely professional. "Anything to watch for tonight?" I asked her on my 5th shift. "Generators sounding a little rough, and the ambient activity has been louder lately. Closer." She didn't meet my eyes as she said it. She was stuffing a novel into her backpack. "Ambient activity." She zipped her bag shut. "You know, the noises, the radio stuff. It comes and goes in waves. Just keep your head down and follow the book." She glanced at the south window, though it was still broad daylight. "It's almost that time of year." She left before I could ask what she meant. I was alone again with the hum of the radios and the weight of the unspoken. The rules were my anchor. I performed the 3:15 p.m. inventory with religious fervor. I locked the door at 5 p.m. on the 2nd. I never looked at the south window between 1 and 1:15. I was a model of compliance. And yet, the forest seemed to be pressing in. The shadows outside the windows felt thicker. The silence between radio checks felt more like a held breath. One night, during the 11 p.m. perimeter check, I saw a figure. It was standing at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the reach of the security light. It was tall and wore what looked like a Forest Service jacket, but the color was wrong, a dull brown instead of the standard green. It was perfectly still, facing the station. My light swept over it. I saw no face, just a dark shape under the hood. Rule 1. If you see someone approaching the station, they are not a visitor. This one wasn't approaching. It was just watching. I completed my check, my back prickling. 3 minutes flat. I got inside and barred the door. I didn't write it in the log. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because it felt different from the other anomalies. It felt deliberate. A few nights later, the escalation began. It started with the radio. A voice on Channel 9, a ranger I knew was named Jess, signed off after reporting a cleared trail. His sign-off was standard. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Jess, clear and off." But 5 minutes later, a voice that was almost his, but flatter, devoid of his usual warmth, came back on. "Dispatch, Confirm last transmission. Over. I keyed the mic. Ranger Jess, your last was clear and off. Everything okay? A pause, then the flat voice. Negative. Requesting base weather check. Over. My blood went cold. Rule 3. Do not respond on Channel 6 unless you hear the phrase, check base weather clear. This was Channel 9. This was a Ranger. But the phrasing was wrong. It was too close. It was a lure. I took a breath. Ranger Jess, confirm your identity. What's your badge number? Static hissed back at me. Then the voice, now with a faint, mocking edge. It's me, Leo, badge 714. The weather, check it. He was using my name. Rangers didn't do that. They used call signs, and his badge number was wrong. Jess S was 741. This thing, this mimic, had the digits reversed. I let go of the microphone. No response to unverified request, I said aloud. To the empty room. The radio stayed silent after that. The next incident was the light in the hallway. The station had a short corridor leading to a bathroom and a storage closet. The light was a simple pull cord fixture. At 2:14 a.m., it turned on by itself. I saw the yellow glow spill into the main room. I stood up, walked over, and turned it off. The pull cord was still swaying. 30 seconds later, it came on again. This wasn't in the rules. I stood there, staring at the illuminated hallway. It was just a light, a short circuit. But in this place, there was no such thing as just anything. I turned it off again. I held the cord, feeling the cheap plastic cool in my hand. I waited a full minute. Nothing. I returned to my desk. At 2:28 a.m., it flicked on again. A new rule was forming in my mind, born of pattern recognition. If the hallway light turns on by itself, do not turn it off a third time. I left it on. The rest of the night, the station was lit by the green glow of the radios and the stark yellow of that single, uncooperative bulb. It felt like a defeat. Bill arrived in the morning. He saw the light still on. He didn't comment. He read the log, his lips a thin line. He closed the book and looked at me. We need to talk about the amendments. He opened a locked drawer in the desk I had never seen him use and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He handed it to me. The heading read, Amendments to Dispatch Protocol. 12. All radio requests for a weather check or status confirmation that do not originate from a scheduled check-in are to be ignored regardless of channel. Verified rangers will use their assigned codes. 13. The hallway light is not to be manipulated after it self-activates. If it turns itself on, leave it on until the end of your shift. 14. If you observe a stationary figure at the tree line during a perimeter check, do not shine your light directly on it. Avert your beam and complete the check. Note the location in the log. 15. The inventory now includes the axe. Check that it remains in its designated mount on the supply locker wall. 16. The sound of a child crying from within the station walls is a known acoustic anomaly. Do not investigate its source. 17. If you hear your name spoken from the radio when no transmission is active, you are to respond verbally with signal weak. Repeat. Only once. I read the list, my stomach tightening. Each amendment was a response to something I had experienced. The light, the figure, the voice on Channel 6. They were closing loopholes, tightening the noose of procedure. Rule 16 meant the crying was going to start inside the station. Rule 17 meant the thing on the radio was going to learn my name. These are new? I asked, my voice hoarse. No, Bill said. They're situational. They only get posted after the situation manifests. It means you're being tested. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something like pity in his eyes. It always happens to the new ones. The forest learns you. It finds your seams. Your job is not to let it unravel you. He took the amendments sheet back and locked it in the drawer. Memorize them. They're yours now. That night, the forest learned my name. It was 1:07 a.m. during the forbidden window for the south-facing window. I was staring resolutely at my desk when a voice, soft and intimate, whispered from the radio speaker. It wasn't a transmission. The light wasn't on. The voice was just there, woven into the static. Leo. It was my mother's voice, or a perfect copy of it, the way it had sounded the last time I saw her, tired and frail. I hadn't heard that voice in 3 years. My head jerked up. I stared at the dark grill of the speaker. Leo, honey, are you there? Rule 17. Respond verbally with signal weak. Repeat. Only once. My throat was sandpaper. I couldn't form the words. To use that phrase, that cold, professional lie, in response to that voice felt like a sacrilege. Leo, I'm scared. It's so dark here. I squeezed my eyes shut. It wasn't her. It was a recording, a trick. It was the forest learning me. It had found my seam. My mother was the debt I could never repay, the reason I was here in the first place. Signal weak, I croaked. Repeat. The static hissed, and for a moment, I thought it was over. Then the voice came back, clear and sharp, laced with a venom I had never heard from my mother. You left me here, Leo. I ripped the headset off and threw it onto the desk. The voice continued, faint but audible from the speaker itself, a stream of accusations and pleas. I put my hands over my ears. I didn't breathe again until the all-clear clicks came on Channel 9 at 1:15. The voice vanished mid-sentence. I was shaking. I had obeyed the rule, but it felt like I had failed. I had acknowledged it. I had given it a piece of me. The next week was a siege. The anomalies came faster, more personal. I heard the child crying, not from the radio, but from inside the walls, a muffled, hopeless sound. I saw the stationary figure at the tree line during every perimeter check, sometimes 1, sometimes 2. I averted my light. The axe in the supply locker was always in its mount, but one night I found a single, long, dark hair caught in the blade's edge. I removed it and didn't log it. I was fraying. Sleep was a memory. I existed in a state of hypervigilance, jumping at every creak of the building, every burst of static. The rules were the only thing holding me together. They were my liturgy, my prayer. I recited them in my head as I performed my duties. I was no longer a man doing a job. I was a ritual being performed by a body. The final test began on a night when a storm rolled in from the west. The wind howled around the station, rattling the windows. The power flickered and died at 9:32 p.m. The hum of the equipment ceased, plunging the room into a silence that was immediately filled by the raging weather. I was ready. I pulled the emergency lanterns from under the desk. Their cold, battery-powered light threw long, dancing shadows. This was a trigger. I went to the locked drawer. Bill had given me the key the day before, without a word. Inside was a third sheet of paper. Emergency protocols. 1. During a power loss, all perimeter checks are suspended. You will remain inside. 2. Seal the gap under the south-facing window with the roll of aluminum tape from the supply locker. Apply 3 complete rotations of tape. Check the seal every 30 minutes. 3. Channel 9 will be unreliable. Monitor Channel 2. You will hear only one voice on Channel 2. Acknowledge every transmission it makes with the word confirmed. Do not say anything else. 4. The knocks will come more frequently. Respond to doubles. For triples, hold your breath. If you hear a 4th knock, use the flare from the supply locker. Light it and place it against the front door. Do not look at the light it casts. 5. Dawn is your only relief. Do not fall asleep. The storm was the opening act. The main performance began at 10:05 p.m. I was applying the 3rd rotation of tape to the bottom of the south window when a double knock sounded at the front door. I walked over and knocked once on the interior wall. A triple knock came from the roof, directly above me. I held my breath. 60 seconds later, the all-clear signal came not from the radio, but from the walls themselves, a series of faint clicks and taps. I switched the radio to channel 2. Static. Then a voice, deep and grating, utterly unfamiliar. Perimeter compromised. Confirmed, I said, my voice tight. A few minutes passed. The wind screamed. Something heavy slammed against the side of the building. The whole structure shuddered. The voice on channel 2 returned. West wall breach. Confirmed. There was no west wall breach. The logs were solid. It was a lie. I had to confirm it anyway. The knocks came in a frenzy. Double, triple, single, double. I responded, held my breath, ignored. It was a percussive madness. I was a machine, moving from door to wall to radio, my actions dictated by the protocol. I was no longer Leo from Boise. I was the dispatcher. At 11:47 p.m., the voice on channel 2 said, Leo, your mother is at the door. Let her in. I froze. My hand, halfway to the wall to answer a double knock, hung in the air. It was using the protocol against me. It was using me against me. Confirmed, I whispered. The word tasting like ash. A new sound started then, a scratching at the south window, the one I had just sealed. Not a branch. It was the sound of fingernails, long and hard, dragging down the glass. Then a voice, my mother's voice, right outside the pane. Leo, it's so cold. Let me in, baby, please. I couldn't. The door was locked until 6:47 a.m. The rules were absolute. I looked at the axe on the supply locker wall. I could break the window. I could let her in. The thought was a fire in my exhausted mind. I could end this. I could finally save her. I took a step toward the locker. The radio on channel 2 crackled. The deep voice was urgent, almost angry. Mimicry active. Hold the line. The words were a bucket of cold water. Mimicry active. It was part of the script. This temptation, this ultimate lure, was just another procedural step. I stopped. I turned my back on the axe and on the window where my mother wept. I'm sorry, I said to the empty room. The weeping turned to a snarl of rage. The scratching became pounding. The whole window frame shook, but the tape held. The rest of the night was a blur of terror and rigid compliance. A 4th knock came at the door at 3:15 a.m. I fumbled with a road flare, my hands shaking so badly I could barely strike the igniter. It flared to life with a blinding white light and a harsh hiss. I shoved it against the base of the front door, turning my head away as the protocol demanded. The light that filled the room was not the flare's normal red glow. It was a searing actinic blue that cast no shadows. From outside, I heard a high-pitched shriek that seemed to tear the very air. When the flare sputtered out a minute later, the pounding and the knocking had stopped. Only the wind remained. At 6:47 a.m., as the storm abated and a dirty gray light filtered through the windows, I unlocked the front door. The clearing was a mess of broken branches and scattered needles. The marker posts were all down, snapped off at the base. Lying in the mud near the south window was a single long white feather. tipped in what looked like dried blood. Bill found me still sitting at the desk, the emergency lanterns dim beside me. He surveyed the damage outside, the downed posts, the feather. He looked at me. I probably looked like hell. "You used the flare," he said. I nodded. He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to me. My hands were steady as I took it. "The posts," I said. "They're all down." "We'll replace them," he said. "They always go down during a big one." He sipped his coffee. "You held. That's what matters." "I almost didn't." "But you did." He set his cup down. "My last shift is Friday. They're transferring me to a desk in McCall. The job is yours if you want it." I looked around the station. It was just a building. But it was also a fortress, a prison, a sanctuary. I had a debt in Boise, but it felt smaller now, a mundane concern compared to the debt I owed this place. It had taken pieces of me, but it had given me a purpose in return: survival. The pure, simple economy of following the rules. "I want it," I heard myself say. Bill nodded, as if he'd never expected any other answer. He showed me how to order new marker posts. He gave me the combination to the safe where the master logs were kept. There were no more speeches, no more warnings. The baton was being passed. On my first official shift as the permanent night dispatcher, I arrived early. I performed the 3:15 p.m. inventory. Everything was accounted for. The axe was clean. I sat at the desk and opened a fresh logbook. Before I began my entries, I took out a clean sheet of paper. I wrote a new, clean copy of the core rules, incorporating the amendments. My handwriting was neat and precise, almost identical to Bill's. I left space at the bottom for future additions. I wondered what new rules the forest would teach me, what new seams it would find. I placed the sheet on the desk, ready for the next person who might need it, though I knew with a cold certainty that I would likely be the one adding to it for a long, long time. The radio hissed on Channel 9, a normal transmission. I picked up the pen. The night was waiting. The first month as the permanent dispatcher was a study in a new kind of normal. The fear didn't leave, but it changed. It became a low-grade hum in the background, a constant companion I learned to work around like a chronic ache. The rules were no longer external commands. They were the internal logic of my existence. My body moved through the rituals without conscious thought. Inventory at 3:15. Lock the door at 5. Avert my eyes from the south window at 1. I was a gear in a strange, silent machine. The forest, however, was not content with this stalemate. It had learned my name, my mother's voice. Now it began to learn the station itself, probing for weaknesses in its architecture. In my resolve, it started with the maps. The large topographic map on the wall was a permanent fixture, its details updated with pins and thin colored threads. One morning, after a particularly quiet night, I noticed that the distance between 2 known peaks, marked as 7 miles on the map's scale, had been subtly altered. The contour lines were the same, the labels were correct, but the space between the 2 points felt compressed, as if the paper itself had shrunk in that one specific area. I measured it with the brass ruler kept in the desk drawer. According to the scale, it was still 7 miles, but my eyes, trained on this map for weeks, insisted it was now 6. I said nothing. I logged the normal radio traffic and went home. The next night, it was the corridor. The short hallway to the bathroom and storage closet had always felt like exactly 12 paces. I decounted them many times. That night, during a routine trip, it was 14. I stopped, mid-stride, my heart thudding. I backed up to the main room and walked it again. 13 paces, a third time, 12. The geometry had reasserted itself. I didn't use the bathroom. I returned to my desk and didn't move for an hour. The amendments had prepared me for auditory tricks, for visual lures. They had not prepared me for the building itself becoming fluid. I added a note to the growing list in my mind, a rule not yet written down. Trust the measured distance, not the perceived one. Trust the clock, not your own fatigue. The anomalies began to intertwine, creating more complex tests. During a perimeter check at 11 p.m., I saw 2 of the stationary figures at the tree line. As I averted my light from the first, I saw the second one, 50 yards to its left, raise an arm and point directly at me. The gesture was slow, deliberate. I finished the check, my skin crawling. When I got back inside, the phone was ringing. I let it ring. It stopped after 3 rings. Then, from the radio on channel 2, which was only for emergencies, the deep voice said, "You are being observed." "Confirmed," I replied, my voice a dry rustle. The child's crying started up inside the walls, louder than before, a raw, hiccuping sound of genuine distress. It was coming from the vicinity of the sealed south window. Rule 16, do not investigate its source. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. It sounded so real. It sounded like it was right there, trapped in the insulation, just on the other side of the drywall. I wanted to get the axe, to just knock a small hole in the wall, to see, to know. I didn't move. I counted the seconds. The crying lasted for 4 minutes and 22 seconds, then cut off abruptly. The following evening, Bill was gone. His truck didn't pull into the clearing. Instead, a woman I'd never seen before arrived in a Jeep. She introduced herself as Maya, the district manager. She was brisk, efficient, and carried no trace of the weary resignation that Bill and Sarah had worn like a second skin. Bill's retirement was effective immediately. "Personal reasons," she said, her tone not inviting questions. "I'll be your direct supervisor. I understand you've been fully briefed on the operational particulars." "I have the rules," I said. "Good. See that you follow them." She did a quick, perfunctory walk-through of the station. She glanced at the south window, at the supply locker, her expression unreadable. "Your performance reviews have been satisfactory. Keep up the good work." She left as quickly as she came, leaving behind a cloud of expensive perfume that seemed alien and offensive in the dusty air. Her visit was a disruption. It reminded me that there was a world outside this clearing, a world of bureaucracy and normalcy that was willfully, dangerously ignorant of the reality of this place. They knew, of course. They had to know. But they managed it with paperwork and euphemisms. Operational particulars. It made me feel more alone than ever. That loneliness became a new weapon for the forest. A few nights after Maya's visit, during the long, dead hours between 2 and 3 in the morning, I heard a familiar sound, the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked out the front window, a thing I rarely did after dark. Bill's truck was pulling into the clearing. My heart leapt with a foolish, desperate hope. He'd come back. He had advice, or maybe just company. The truck door opened and Bill got out. He looked exactly as he always did, his worn jacket zipped to his chin. He walked toward the station, then stopped about 30 feet from the door. He looked up at the building, a puzzled expression on his face. "Leo," he called out, his voice muffled by the glass. "The door's locked. Everything okay in there?" Rule 1. If you see someone approaching the station, they are not a visitor. This wasn't just someone. this was Bill. My mind raced. What if he was real? What if he'd come back to check on me? What if Maya had been wrong or lying? He looked so solid, so real. "Leo, you in there? My key's not working." He jangled a key ring in his hand. It was the one I'd seen him use a dozen times. I stood frozen by the door. This was the most sophisticated mimicry I had yet encountered. It had his vehicle, his face, his voice, his keyring. It had the casual, slightly confused demeanor he might genuinely have if he found the station locked during a shift. Every instinct screamed at me to let him in. But the rules were absolute. The door was not to be unlocked until 6:47 a.m. for any reason. "Bill," I said through the door, my voice low. "Your shift is over." "What? No, I'm covering for Sarah. She's sick. Didn't they call you?" He took a step closer. "Come on, Leo. It's cold out here. Let me in." He was lying. Sarah wasn't sick. I'd seen her just yesterday. The confirmation was a cold stone in my gut. This was the lure. It was using my isolation, my lingering fondness for Bill, against me. "I can't," I said. "The door stays locked." His friendly expression melted away, replaced by a flat, empty stare. "You're making a mistake, Leo." He didn't sound like Bill anymore. The voice was the same, but the intonation was gone, replaced by a monotone certainty. "You need me. You won't last the winter alone." He stood there, staring at the door for another full minute. Then he turned, got back in his truck, and drove away. The taillights vanished into the trees. I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, and stayed there until the 3 a.m. perimeter check. I didn't write it in the log. The forest was learning, adapting. It had tried terror and failed. It had tried personal grief, and I had barely resisted. Now it was trying a more insidious approach, a simulation of normalcy, of help. It was showing me that it could wear any face it wanted. The realization was more frightening than any monster. A monster is a thing you can define. This was a void that could reflect whatever you desired most. A new pattern emerged over the next fortnight. The midnight hour, between 1 and 1:15, became a focal point. The scraping at the south window was a constant, but now it was accompanied by other sounds. One night, it was the smell of fresh-baked bread, a scent that had no place here, and that made my stomach clench with a hunger that was more memory than physical need. Another night, it was the sound of a baseball game on a tinny radio. The crowd roar and the crack of the bat, a perfect replica of the games my father used to listen to in his workshop. I never looked. I kept my eyes on the logbook, on the grain of the wood, on my own hands. I became an expert on the topography of my desk. I found a whorl in the wood that looked like a staring eye, a long scratch that bisected the surface like a river on a map. These became my anchors. The 15 minutes became a meditation in endurance. One night, the temptation was auditory only, but far more direct. As the clock ticked over to 1 a.m., a new voice spoke from the radio, a calm, reasonable male voice I didn't recognize. "Dispatcher, this is a priority update. We have a confirmed security breach in your sector. An armed and dangerous individual has escaped custody and is believed to be in your vicinity. We need you to unlock the door for a tactical team that is en route. Acknowledge." It was a perfect lie. It used the right jargon. It provided a logical, terrifying reason to break the primary rule. My hand went to the deadbolt. An armed man loose in the woods was a plausible, real-world threat. What if this was real? What if my adherence to the rules was about to get me killed by a very human monster? But the rules were clear. The door wasn't to be unlocked for any reason. I keyed the mic on channel 9, my default. Request verification. What is the authentication code? The voice came back, smooth as oil. Authentication is not required for this emergency protocol. The team will be there in 5 minutes. Be ready to open the door. Without authentication, I cannot comply, I said, the words feeling hollow and stupid. Dispatcher, the voice said, a hard edge entering its tone. This is a direct order. Lives are at stake. Open the door. I let go of the microphone. I said nothing. I listened to the static on channel 9. The voice did not return. No tactical team arrived. At 1:15 a.m., the all-clear clicks sounded. I had passed another test. I had chosen the unknowable horror of the rules over the knowable horror of a human threat. It was a fundamental shift in my psychology. The rules were not just for my safety. They were the only reality I could trust. The physical world continued its subtle warping. I began a small private inventory of my own, beyond the official one. I measured the hallway every time I walked down it. 12 paces remained the standard, but on 3 separate occasions over 2 weeks, it was 13. I started leaving a single tiny piece of gravel from the path on the floor at the entrance to the hall. One morning, I found it had moved 6 inches to the left. No one had been in the station but me. The axe was the most consistent concern. Rule 15 mandated I check its position. It was always there, on its mount. But sometimes the angle of the head was different. Sometimes the handle felt warmer or colder than the surrounding air. Once, I found a fresh, damp pine needle stuck to the blade. I removed it. I never logged these things. They were my secret amendments, a private ledger of the station's slow, persistent rebellion against physics. The forest was patient. It had all the time in the world. I was just a temporary custodian, a flicker of consciousness in the long, dark life of this place. My job was not to win. My job was to hold the line for my shift and then pass the duty on. This thought, which should have been despairing, became my greatest source of strength. I was not a hero in a story. I was a sentry on a wall. My only purpose was to remain vigilant until I was relieved. The next major event was not a test for me, but a consequence for someone else. It came via the logbook. I was reviewing the older volumes, looking for patterns, when I found an entry from 6 years prior, from a dispatcher named Alex. The handwriting was messy, agitated. 2:05 a.m., continuous scratching at south window, louder than ever. Can't take it. Rule 7 is stupid. I'm looking. I have to see. The entry ended there. The next entry was in a different, neater hand bills dated the following day. It read simply, "Station audit complete. All supplies accounted for. Dispatcher Alex has resigned, effective immediately. No forward contact." There was no more. Alex had broken a rule. He had looked, and he was gone. The logbook didn't say he was dead. It said he had resigned, but the no forward contact was a chilling finality. The forest didn't always consume you. Sometimes it just took you, erased you from the world beyond the tree line. I closed the old logbook and placed it back on the shelf. I didn't need a ghost story to enforce the rules. The bureaucratic, bloodless language of the log was far more terrifying. The nights grew longer, the dark arriving sooner and clinging later. That time of year, Sarah had said. I understood now. The balance was shifting. The forest's influence was growing stronger with the lengthening darkness. My rituals became more vital, more desperate. The 3:15 p.m. inventory was no longer a chore. It was a warding spell. The locking of the door at 5 o'clock was the sealing of a tomb, with me safely inside. One evening, as I was counting the MREs for the 11th time, I noticed a discrepancy. I was one short, 23, not 24. My blood ran cold. I counted again. 23. I checked the log from my previous shift. I had signed off on 24. I checked Bill's final log, 24. There was no record of anyone else entering the station. The door had been locked. Something had taken an MRE. It wasn't the loss of the food that frightened me. It was the implication. The rules were a barrier. They kept things out. But if something could get in, could take a physical object from a locked room, then the barrier was not absolute. The station was not a fortress. It was a sieve. I wrote it in the log. 3:20 p.m. Inventory discrepancy. 1 MRE missing. No signs of forced entry. I didn't know what else to do. I was reporting a burglary by a ghost. That night, the atmosphere in the station was different. The usual background hum of menace was replaced by a watchful, predatory silence. It felt like something was in here with me, satisfied, waiting. I did my perimeter checks, my eyes constantly darting to the tree line. The figures were there, all 4 of them, one at each corner, standing sentinel. They didn't move. They just watched. At 1:00 a.m., I took my position at the desk, my eyes fixed on the whirl in the wood. The scraping at the south window began, but it was softer tonight, almost languid. Then a new sound, a faint, rhythmic clicking. It was coming from inside the station, from the hallway. I didn't move. I didn't look. Rule 16, do not investigate. The clicking grew slowly louder. It was the sound of hard, chitinous legs on linoleum. It was moving down the hall toward the main room. I could hear it just beyond the threshold, in the darkness where the emergency lantern light didn't reach. It stopped. I held my breath. I could feel it there, just out of sight. A presence. A thing that had stolen an MRE and was now announcing itself. It didn't feel angry or threatening. It felt curious. Then a smell washed over me. It was the smell of loam and decay, and something sweetly chemical, like antifreeze. It was the smell of the forest, but concentrated, brought inside. The clicking started again, receding back down the hall. It faded away. At 1:15 a.m., the all-clear signal came. The smell lingered for another hour. I sat in the chair, my body rigid. I had not broken a single rule. I had not looked, not investigated, not responded. I had survived. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the game had changed. The forest was no longer just outside. It had established a beachhead. The rules were not just about keeping things out. They were now about managing a cohabitation. When dawn came, I didn't feel relief. I felt like I was stepping out of a cage I would have to re-enter in a few hours. I drove home to my cabin, the missing MRE, a heavier weight in my mind than any debt I had ever carried. The forest was inside, and I had to go back in there tonight and lock the door behind me. The missing MRE changed everything. The station was no longer a sanctuary. It was a shared space. The rules, which had once felt like a shield, now felt like a truce, a fragile set of protocols governing my interaction with a permanent, unseen roommate. My focus shifted from pure defense to a kind of grim domesticity. I was not just a dispatcher. I was a caretaker for a place that was actively, subtly alive. I began the next shift with a heightened sense of ritual. The 3:15 p.m. inventory was no longer a simple count. It was a territorial survey. I noted not just the presence of items, but their exact orientation. I measured the water levels in the jugs to the millimeter. I counted the road flares twice. Everything was present, except, of course, for the one MRE. I left the space where it had been empty, a silent acknowledgement of the theft. At 5 o'clock, when I locked the door, the finality of the sound was different. It wasn't me locking the world out. It was me locking myself in with it. The first few hours were tense, silent. I monitored Channel 9, the mundane traffic of rangers and weather reports, a comforting lie. At 7 p.m., I prepared for the first perimeter check. As I reached for the deadbolt, I heard a sound from the hallway. A soft, shuffling scrape. It was the sound of something being dragged across the floor. I froze my hand on the cold iron of the bar. Rule 6 was absolute. The perimeter check had to be conducted, but Rule 16 was also absolute. Do not investigate. This was new. This was an active obstruction. I made a decision. The perimeter check was a timed, external ritual. The thing in the hall was an internal anomaly. The external rules took precedence. I had to believe that. I slid the bar back, turned the lock, and stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind me. The night air was bitingly cold. I moved quickly, my flashlight beam a frantic yellow eye sweeping the ground. Northeast post, upright. Northwest post, upright. Southwest post, upright. Southeast post, upright. I completed the circuit in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. I was back at the door. I reached for the handle, my heart hammering. Had it locked me out? The door opened. I slipped inside, re-engaging the lock and bar with practice speed. I leaned against the wood, breathing heavily. The station was silent. The shuffling from the hall had stopped. I returned to my desk. On the logbook, lying across the page I had been writing on, was a single, long-stemmed pine needle. It was fresh, green, and damp with sap. It had not been there when I left. It was a message, a calling card. I had performed my duty, and it had acknowledged my return. I carefully picked up the needle between 2 fingers and dropped it into the trash can. I did not log it. The next test was more direct. At 10:30 p.m., the radio on Channel 2 crackled. The deep, grating voice spoke. Inventory incorrect. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Confirmed, I said, my throat tight. 1 item unaccounted for, the voice continued. Confirmed. A trade is required. I said nothing. This was not part of the protocol. The voice on Channel 2 was only to be acknowledged, not negotiated with. 1 MRE, 1 item in return. Place it in the hall. The radio went silent. I stared at it. This was an escalation I was not prepared for. It was introducing commerce. It was formalizing the theft. If I complied, I was accepting its presence, its rights. I was bending the rules. If I refused, what would it do? The rules had kept me safe so far, but they had been predicated on the station being a defensible space. That was no longer true. I wrestled with the decision for an hour. The rules were silent. There was no amendment for this. I was in uncharted territory. At 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes before my next perimeter check, I made a choice. I went to the supply locker and took out a single road flare. It was not food. It was not water. It was a tool of defense, an item from the emergency protocol. It felt significant. I walked to the entrance of the hallway. The light was off, the corridor a pool of darkness. I could feel a presence there, waiting. I placed the flare on the floor, just over the threshold, and stepped back. I returned to my desk. I did not look back. I listened. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, the soft clicking sound. It approached the flare. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of the flare being dragged away down the hall. The clicking receded. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I had done it. I had engaged. I had broken the spirit of the rules, if not the letter. I felt a profound sense of shame and a deeper, more disturbing sense of accomplishment. I had communicated. The following morning, when I unlocked the door at 6:47 a.m., I found my trade waiting for me on the front step. It was the missing MRE. The package was torn open, the contents gone. But tucked inside the empty wrapper was a piece of quartz about the size of my thumb, milky white, and shot through with a vein of fool's gold. It was beautiful. I picked it up. It was cold and smooth. I put it in my pocket. I didn't tell Maya. I didn't log it. It was my secret, my first trophy. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The thing in the station, which I had started to think of as the tenant, was now an active participant in my shift. The rules still governed our interactions, but they had developed a new, unspoken layer of etiquette. I would sometimes leave a cup of water on the floor by the hall. It would be empty in the morning. In return, I would find small, strange objects on my desk. A perfectly preserved beetle with iridescent wings. A twist of wire that looked like a tiny, complex knot. A shard of obsidian so sharp it could cut paper. I never saw it. I only heard it, the clicking, the shuffling, and saw the evidence of its passage. It became a part of the station's ecosystem, like the mice that sometimes got into the walls, but infinitely more intelligent and deliberate. This new equilibrium was shattered by the arrival of a rookie. Her name was Chloe, and she was young, eager, and entirely unprepared. Maya brought her in one afternoon, her expression grim. "This is Chloe. She'll be shadowing you for a few shifts." "Training her up," Maya said, her tone brooking no argument. Chloe smiled, a bright, nervous flash. "I'm really excited to learn from you, Leo. I've heard the overnight dispatch can be pretty intense." I just stared at her. She had no idea. She was a lamb being led into a slaughterhouse that had just recently learned to appreciate artisanal gifts. Maya left, and Chloe looked around the station with open curiosity. "So this is it? Pretty cozy. What's the first thing we do?" "The inventory," I said, my voice flat. "At 3:15, precisely." I showed her the ropes. I explained the radio channels, the logbook, the basic layout. I did not show her the binder of rules. I did not tell her about the tenant. It wasn't my place. It was Bill's method, and it had worked on me. The forest had to learn her on its own. My job was to demonstrate the procedures and hope she was a fast learner. The first few hours of our shift were uneventful. Chloe was chatty, asking questions about the rangers, the trails, the wildlife. I gave her monosyllabic answers. I could feel the station watching her, assessing this new variable. At 5 p.m., I locked the door. Chloe watched me, a faint line appearing between her brows. "We lock it. I thought rangers might need to come in sometimes." "The door's locked at 5, I said. "It's not unlocked until 6:47 a.m. "Why?" "It's the rule." She accepted this with a shrug, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes. The rational world was still her baseline. That was her first mistake. The first anomaly for her was the 7 p.m. perimeter check. As we stepped outside, she immediately pointed towards the tree line. "Hey, is that someone over there?" I didn't look. "Ignore it. Check the posts." She was flustered, but complied. She kept glancing toward the figure as we made the rounds. "Who is that? Why are they just standing there?" "They're not a visitor," I said, repeating Rule 1. Back inside, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "That was weird." "It's normal," I replied, and turned back to the radio. The real trouble started at 1 p.m. I took my position at the desk, my eyes fixed away from the south window. Chloe, bored and tired, was fidgeting. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Nothing, just wait." "For what?" "Just wait." The scraping started. It was louder tonight, more aggressive. Chloe's eyes went wide. "What is that?" "Don't worry about it." "It sounds like it's right outside the window." "It is, don't look." She stared at me, then at the dark pane of the south window. The temptation was too much. I saw the conflict on her face, the training, the rational mind fighting against a deep, primal curiosity. "Leo, what if it's an animal? A bear? It could be trying to get in." "It's not a bear. Don't look." The scraping intensified, now accompanied by a low, guttural humming. It was a new sound, one designed to unnerve. Chloe stood up. "This is crazy. I'm just gonna take a quick peek." "Chloe, no." My voice was sharp, commanding. "Sit down. Now." She hesitated, her hand halfway to pulling the curtain aside. "Why? What's the big deal?" "It's Rule 7. You do not look out the south-facing window between 1 and 1:15 a.m. It is not a suggestion." The humming stopped. A new sound replaced it. A child's voice, her voice, but younger, called from just outside the glass. "Chloe? Chloe, help me. I'm stuck." Her face went pale. "What the hell?" "It's not real," I said, my voice low and urgent. "It's a mimic. Do not acknowledge it." "But it sounds like me." The voice came again, now crying. "Chloe, please, it's so dark." I saw her resolve break. The personalization was too effective. She took a step toward the window. I have to see." I stood up, grabbing her arm. "Chloe, listen to me. If you look, you are gone. Do you understand? You will not be coming back from this shift. It happened to a dispatcher named Alex. He looked. He's gone." She wrenched her arm away, her eyes wild with fear and a strange, desperate hope. "What if it's real? What if it's some kind of, I don't know, a time echo? A ghost? My ghost?" "It's not. It's a predator. Now sit down." The clock read 1:12 a.m. 3 more minutes. The crying outside became a wail of pure terror. It was a masterful performance. Chloe was shaking, tears in her eyes. She was fighting every instinct to help what sounded like a younger version of herself in mortal peril. "I can't," she sobbed. "I can't just sit here." "You can. You will." I positioned myself between her and the window. "Look at me. Look at my face. Do not turn around." She stared into my eyes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The wailing outside reached a fever pitch. Then, at exactly 1:15 a.m., it cut off. The all-clear clicks sounded on Channel 9. Chloe collapsed into her chair, trembling uncontrollably. "What was that?" she whispered. "That was the job," I said, my own heart finally slowing its frantic pace. I had nearly failed. I had nearly let her breach. The consequences would have been on both of us. She was silent for the rest of the night. She jumped at every sound. When the single knocks came on the roof, she flinched. When the phone rang at 2 a.m., she stared at it with wide, horrified eyes until it stopped. She was learning. The bright, eager rookie was being sandblasted away, leaving behind a raw, terrified novice. The final lesson came during the 3 a.m. perimeter check. I made her do it alone. She didn't want to go. I insisted. "It's the rule," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. She went, her flashlight beam shaking as she swept it across the clearing. I watched from the window. She checked the northeast post, the northwest post. As she rounded the southwest corner, she stopped. I saw her freeze, her light fixed on something in the trees. The figure was there, but it was closer than I had ever seen it, maybe only 10 yards into the tree line. And it was moving. It took a step forward, out of the shadows, and into the edge of the security light. It was still wearing the dull brown jacket, but now I could see its face, or rather, the lack of it. Where a face should have been was a smooth, pale expanse, featureless except for 2 dark, deep-set holes where eyes might be. Chloe screamed, a short, sharp sound of pure terror. She dropped her flashlight and ran for the door. Rule 6. If it takes longer than 3 minutes, do not re-enter the station. She was at the door in under a minute, pounding on it. "Leo, let me in! Let me in!" I looked at the clock. 2 minutes and 10 seconds. She had not completed the check. The Southeast Post was unverified. "Finish the check, Chloe," I yelled through the door. "No, you saw it. Let me in." "Finish the check. You have 40 seconds. I heard her sobbing on the other side of the door. Then her footsteps, slow and dragging, moved away from the door. I watched her through the window. She was walking toward the southeast corner, her body hunched over, her arms wrapped around herself. She glanced at the post, not even stopping, and turned to run back. She was at the door at 2 minutes and 55 seconds. I unlocked it, and she fell inside, collapsing on the floor. I locked and barred the door behind her. She was a mess, crying and hyperventilating. I didn't comfort her. I went to the desk and wrote in the log. 3:04 a.m. Perimeter check completed. All posts verified. It was a lie, but a necessary one. A failed check required a trip to the outbuilding, and I knew she would never survive that. I had broken a rule for her. I had let her in early. I had lied in the log. I felt the tenant's presence in the hall, a watchful, judging silence. It knew. Chloe never came back for another shift. Maya told me she had quit, citing personal reasons. I wasn't surprised. The forest had learned her quickly, and it had found her weak. It had found her fear of herself. It had almost taken her. My intervention had saved her life, but it had cost me. I had compromised. I had shown that the rules could be bent for the right kind of pressure. The station felt different after that. The tenant was quieter. The gifts stopped. The feeling of a truce was replaced by a cold assessment. I had revealed a flaw in my own compliance. I had proven that my humanity was a vulnerability it could exploit. The long, slow burn of the Idaho night continued. I was alone again, but the solitude was heavier now. I had seen what happened to those who couldn't cut it. I had almost become one of them. The rules were not just for my protection against the forest. They were for my protection against myself, against pity, against compassion, against the very things that made me human. I started sleeping even less. I began double-checking the inventory. I measured the hallway after every trip. I was paring myself down, sanding away the soft edges, becoming a more perfect instrument of procedure. The forest was patient, but so was I. We were in a long war of attrition, and I was determined to be the last one standing, even if standing was all I had left. Winter clamped down on the Payette with a silent, brutal finality. Snow fell in deep, relentless drifts, muffling the world and painting the clearing in a monochrome of white and gray. The tree line, once a distinct boundary, became a vague, fuzzy suggestion in the perpetual twilight. The cold seeped through the logs of the station, a constant, biting presence that the struggling furnace could never quite defeat. The season of long dark was here, and with it, the forest influence seemed to thicken, to become a physical weight in the air. The tenant had become a permanent, mostly silent feature of the night. The gifts had not resumed after the Chloe incident, and the clicking sounds were less frequent. It was there, though. I could feel it, a watchful stillness in the hallway, a subtle pressure change when it moved. Our relationship had cooled into a state of mutual, wary observation. I continued my rituals with robotic precision, and it, for the most part, did not interfere. The anomalies shifted to match the season. The voice on Channel 6 now complained of the cold. The scratching at the south window was often accompanied by the sound of snow sliding from the roof. The figures at the tree line were harder to see, their dark shapes blending into the deep shadows of the pines. But they were always there, patient sentinels in the snow. One night, a new rule revealed itself. It was during the 11 p.m. perimeter check. The snow was knee-deep, and the wind whipped stinging crystals into my face. As I trudged toward the northeast post, my flashlight beam caught a set of footprints circling the station. They were perfect, unbroken, a single set of human-like prints that maintained a precise distance of 10 feet from the walls. They had not been there during my 7:00 p.m. check. I completed my circuit, my eyes tracking the impossible path. The footsteps made a perfect, continuous circle, but they never approached the door, never crossed the threshold of any window. They just circled endlessly. When I got back inside, I added a note to my mental ledger, a potential future amendment. Footsteps circling the structure are a normal, weather-related phenomenon. Do not follow them. Do not measure them. The true test of the deep winter came during a blizzard that the forecasters had underestimated. It began in the late afternoon, and by my shift start, the world had been reduced to a howling white void. The radio was a chaos of weather alerts and canceled patrols. The power died just after 8:02 p.m., and the emergency lanterns flickered to life, their light swallowed by the oppressive dark. I enacted the emergency protocols without hesitation. I sealed the south window with 3 rotations of tape. I switched to Channel 2. The deep voice was there immediately, cutting through the storm static. Containment failure. Multiple contacts. Confirmed, I said, my breath pluming in the suddenly freezing air. The knocks started soon after. Not on the door or the roof, but on all the windows at once. A frantic staccato rhythm that was quickly drowned out by the screaming wind. I responded to the doubles I could distinguish, held my breath for the triples. It was impossible to keep track. The station felt like a drum. Then the voices started, not from the radio, but from outside, carried on the gale. They were a cacophony of familiar sounds my mother, Bill, Chloe, Ranger Jess, the lost child, all calling my name, pleading, threatening, begging to be let in from the storm. It was a symphony of personal torment designed to overwhelm my senses. "Leo, for God's sake, it's me, your mother. I'm freezing." "Dispatcher, this is Ranger Jess. I have a critical injury. I need immediate evacuation." "Leo, it's Bill. The Jeep won't start. Let me in." I stood at the center of the main room, my hands clenched at my sides. I did not go to the door. I did not look out the window. I focused on the protocols. I checked the tape on the south window every 30 minutes. It was holding. I acknowledged every transmission from the voice on Channel 2. Perimeter lost. Confirmed. Structural integrity failing. Confirmed. It was a lie. The station was solid, but I played my part. The siege lasted for hours. The temperature inside plummeted. I could see my breath in the lantern light. I pulled on an emergency blanket, its metallic crinkle a loud counterpoint to the noise outside. The temptation to start the generator was almost overwhelming. Rule 5 was clear. The generator shed is off limits after dusk. But the cold was a rational, physical threat. What was the point of surviving the forest's tricks only to die of hypothermia? I didn't go. I trusted the rules. I wrapped the blanket tighter and kept to the protocols. At the height of the storm, around 2 a.m., a new sound cut through the din. It was the phone. It rang with a shrill mechanical insistence that shouldn't have been possible without power. Rule 9. It is not the phone. I ignored it. It rang 15 times before falling silent. A moment later, the voice on channel 2 spoke, but it was different. It was my own voice. "Leo," it said, with my exact inflections, my weariness. "This is stupid. You're going to die here. Just go to the shed. It's just a rule. What does it matter?" I stared at the radio, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. This was the ultimate personalization. It was using my own mind, my own logic against me. It was right. It was just a rule. In the face of freezing to death, what did any of it matter? "Just go to the shed, Leo," my own voice coaxed. "You're a practical man. This is not practical. This is suicide." I keyed the mic. My hand was shaking. "Confirmed," I whispered. There was a pause. Then my own voice came back, frustrated. "No, that's not the right response. Think, Leo. Use your head." "Confirmed," I said again, louder this time. A snarl of static erupted from the speaker, so violent it sounded like tearing metal. Then the deep voice returned. "Mimicry failure. Hold the line." I had done it. I had faced the most insidious lure, my own rational thought, and I had rejected it. I had chosen the irrational safety of the rules over the logical path to survival. In that moment, I felt something inside me click into place, a final, permanent alignment. I was no longer Leo from Boise. I was the dispatcher. The rules were not a means to an end. They were the end itself. The rest of the night was a testament to my newfound resolve. I performed every step of the protocols with a calm, detached efficiency. When a fourth knock came at the door at 4:30 a.m., I lit a flare and placed it without hesitation, not even flinching at the blast of blue light. When the child's crying started inside the walls, I hummed a tuneless melody to myself to block it out. Dawn came late and grudgingly, a faint lightening of the gray-white fury outside. The storm began to abate. The wind died down to a moan, then a whisper. The knocks and voices ceased. At 6:47 a.m., I unlocked the front door. It opened onto a wall of snow 3 feet high. I had to push to get out. The clearing was a pristine, sculpted landscape of drifts. The marker posts were buried, only the very tips visible. The world was silent, cleansed, and there, in the center of the clearing, untouched by the storm, was a perfect circle of bare ground. In the center of the circle lay the body of a deer. It was a mule deer, a large buck. It was lying on its side as if sleeping, but its head was twisted at an impossible angle, facing straight up at the sky. Its eyes were open, clouded with frost. There were no tracks leading to or from the circle. It was as if it had fallen from the sky. I looked at it for a long time. It was not a gift. It was a message, a demonstration of power. The forest could suspend its own rules of nature whenever it wished. It could create a calm eye in its own storm. It could place a dead thing in the center of a clean, white world as a reminder of what it could do. I went back inside. I didn't touch the deer. I didn't report it. When Maya arrived hours later on a snowmobile, I simply said the night had been eventful. She saw the deer from a distance, her face unreadable. She didn't ask about it. The deep winter passed in a series of such incidents. The forest and I were in a state of cold war, each testing the other's boundaries. I found that my hyper-compliance had earned me a degree of not safety, but a predictable pattern of harassment. The anomalies became almost routine. I could set my watch by the 1 a.m. scraping. The voice on Channel 6 was a nightly occurrence I barely registered. The tenant began to interact again. The gifts returned, but they were darker now. A bird's skull, picked clean, a knot of fur and bone. I accepted them without comment and disposed of them. It felt like we had reached an understanding. We were two predators sharing a territory, respecting the lines that kept us from each other's throats. Spring came slowly, the snow retreating in fits and starts. The day the last dirty patch of ice melted from the clearing, I found a new sheet of paper on the desk. It was not in Bill's hand or mine. The writing was spidery, composed of sharp, angular strokes. It was a list of 3 rules. 18. In spring, the figure at the southeast tree line may approach to within 5 yards. Do not avert your light, avert your eyes. 19. The sound of digging from beneath the foundation is a sign of renewal. It will pass in 7 nights. 20. When the first wildflower blooms in the clearing, you are to pick it and place it in the hall. They were new amendments, but they hadn't come from Bill or Maya. They had come from the forest itself, or from the tenant. The distinction no longer seemed important. The rules were evolving, and I was the instrument of their implementation. I obeyed. When the lone, brave purple flower pushed through the wet earth. A week later, I went outside, picked it, and laid it carefully on the hallway floor. It was gone by morning. In its place was a single, perfect arrowhead, made of the same black obsidian as the earlier shard. The baton was not just being passed from one dispatcher to another. It was being passed between worlds. I was the translator, the conduit. My job was to observe, to comply, and to record the ever-shifting treaty between the human world and whatever lived in this patch of Idaho wilderness. The days grew longer. The air lost its bite. My debt in Boise was a forgotten dream from another lifetime. This was my life now. The silence of the station was my silence. The rules were my thoughts. One evening, as I was preparing for my shift, a new dispatcher arrived with Maya. A young man, fresh-faced and nervous. His name was Mark. Maya gave me the same look Bill had given me a lifetime ago. "Train him," she said. I nodded. I showed Mark the inventory. I showed him the radio. I did not show him the rules. I watched as he looked around the station with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He was where I had been. He had no idea. At 5 p.m., I locked the door. The sound was as final as ever. Mark looked at me, a question in his eyes. I saw the skepticism, the rational mind trying to find a logical reason. "Why do we lock it?" he asked. I looked at him, my face a calm mask. My eyes, I knew, were as tired and resigned as Bill's had been. "It's the rule," I said. I turned toward the desk, where the clean, handwritten list of rules lay, ready for him to discover on his own. The radio hissed with static. Outside, the shadows were lengthening, reaching for the walls of the station. The night was waiting, and I was ready to teach him how to survive it.